My name is Alice Fremantle. I work as a social compliance auditor for a certifying body here in Australia called AusMeet. I go out to farms and other locations around the country and perform social compliance audits. I've been auditing for about 11 months. I actually got into the profession by accident, so I was sitting across from my now boss and he offered me a job. From there I went and did 6 months certification, sat my 3 APSCA exams, and now I'm a fully certified social compliance auditor. What I have found valuable about APSCA as an organisation is that it's trying to legitimise this profession, which I think, given that we deal with ethics and integrity, it's really important that we as auditors are upheld to the same standard. We're seeing more of a trend for consumers wanting products that are ethically sourced, from the paddock to the plate, and we form a large part of certifying that supply chain. I love the fact that I can go to many different places and I feel like I help people. We're often speaking with the lowest worker on site and they often don't have a voice. So I feel that through the interview process, through the social compliance audit, we can help them gain a voice and raise issues that they may not have felt comfortable raising. It can be intimidating being young and female in this profession. I find it does give us a unique advantage, however, because we can set the interviewee at ease, where we're not as intimidating. We often look more like their friend than sort of an auditor. So I do feel that any negatives from coming into the industry with less experience does help. My advice for young females thinking of entering this industry is definitely give it a go. I think sometimes we can sell ourselves a little short. We get imposter syndrome and think that we may not know as much as what we think we do. One of the key learnings I take with me is something that all of our auditors reinforce to the client during the opening meeting, and it's that these audits are just a snapshot in time. We won't be able to see everything, and there may be things that we miss. We can try our hardest, and we just need to be kind to ourselves.
Okay, I love that video. I want to meet Alice. I think we'd be great friends. It's my privilege now to introduce the moderator for this next panel, Colleen Vien, who is our Inbound APSCA President and CEO as of tomorrow. So Colleen, we're very excited to have you here. Before taking on this post at APSCA, she served as Senior Vice President for the Purpose and Impact Group and ESG team at Porter Novelli, where she collaborated with Fortune 500 companies on assignments encompassing social impact and environmental assessment, sustainability strategy development, and CSR and ESG reporting. Prior to that, she spent over a decade with Timberland, overseeing human rights and environmental standards across the company's global supply chain, and she's had involvement in various multi-stakeholder associations, including Fair Factories Clearinghouse, the Social Labor Convergence Project, SAI, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and the Global Social Compliance Program. So welcome to Colleen.
Thank you, Rochelle. Hi, everybody. With me today to unpack the potential of learning is distinguished guests. We have Singh. He's with WIRE. As many of you may know, WIRE is a global training organization. Online, we have Emily Sims. Welcome, Emily. Emily is a senior specialist with the International Labor Organization, and she is, among other things, she manages the ILO's Help Desk for Business. So we'll hear more from her about that. We have Susanne Gebauer from the Social Labor Convergence Project, and she'll be sharing more about the tools that they have available for our auditors. And then last but not least, certainly Ben Bostock from Impact, whom many of you know from yesterday's training that he gave, and we'll hear more from Ben on his expertise and experience with respect to forced labor and responsible recruitment, and modern slavery. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. All right, I'm going to try to keep us to a 4 o'clock done, but we started a little bit late so that everybody could have some snacks. So if we go a little bit over 4, I'm sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, so we're going to start with the goal for this session is to unlock learning potential, right? And talk about the opportunities for collaborating with training leaders and different organizations so that we can offer our CSCAs with more CPD options. So let's just kick it off, and we'll just go right around the room here. Emily, let's start with you and get you involved right away. So can you discuss, share with us a bit what the ILO is doing and offering some resources, tools, and trainings for individuals who are in this field of social compliance auditing?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. Well, the main things that we have to offer are our knowledge of the labor standards, which is typically the basis for any auditing process, because those tend to be the basis of any code of conduct these days. So anyone in the social auditing field who is wondering about how to interpret a particular situation they might have seen that doesn't necessarily fit with what they've seen before, or they might have doubts about the logic of what they're being asked, because I can tell you routinely reviewing codes of conduct and questionnaires for auditing and other sorts of tools that companies are using in their due diligence processes, it's very common to get it wrong, or at least partly wrong. So if you have a doubt, or if you are concerned about something you're looking at, and you would like to ask the help desk, it's free, it's confidential, and we're there to help you. But again, our focus is the principles of labor standards that are typically the basis of the audits you're carrying out. You know, obviously national law is your reference point as well, but often it will be one or the other, whichever is higher. And in many countries you'll be working in, the labor standards are what would take precedence. So you're welcome to use the help desk. But just more generally, we have begun working with social auditors, or at least social auditing organizations, because we see you as a critical part of the process of human rights due diligence, a very critical part, because you are the people on the ground that are feeding information back to the companies that are assessing their risks of human rights violations in their business partnerships, in their supply chains. So having a good grounding in the labor standards and our desire for you to be part of a process that is very, shall I say, moving closer and stronger towards convergence, to avoid confusion, to avoid undermining the whole body of jurisprudence behind international labor standards, but also just to help accelerate progress around the world. The easier it is for suppliers to have a consistent set of expectations based on international labor standards with a shared understanding of all the actors along the entire human rights due diligence process chain, is an advantage in not just protecting workers' rights, but broader economic and social development. I will get a little bit later, I think in the second round of questions, to avoid taking too much time in this one, into our training offers as well that we have, that we can help you with.
Great, excellent, thank you so much. Sanjiv, would you like to go next?
What's the question?
What is WIRE offering, and how can we help our auditors get more additional CPD hours? I'll also say that on the screen you also see the QR code, so easy access to everything that our panelists are sharing with us today.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. See, WIRE started 20 years ago, back in 2003. Started out as a social auditing firm, but we very quickly moved away. I'm giving you this background because I want to tell it to you in context of what we did and where we are. Did a lot of the audits back in the days in the Middle East, and that's where we're based, out of Dubai. And we slowly learned that that's not the business we want to be in. We want to be on the other side, probably training and probably consulting. So we worked with the government, training the labor inspectors, understanding the real risks in that part of the world with recruitment, with labor practices. And so we moved on from there and then saw a lot of auditors doing the SA 1000 audits and AMFORI BSCI. It was just BSCI then. Watched them on the field, how they perform, and we said that this is where we want to be. We want to be doing training. We want to be doing capacity building with the auditors because that's what they really need. Right now, Wire offers APSCA CPD recognized courses. These courses these are code neutral. They are meant for any code that is there. And these courses are attended by not just APSCA auditors, but they are also attended by other schemes that want to improve generally competence in auditing. So we've got 4 approved courses, 4 recognized courses. There's another one which is going to be released. It's just been released, actually. We'll get to know more about it tomorrow. Yeah, that's what we offer, and it's all available on our website. I believe the QR code will take you there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. Susanne?
Yeah, so I'm here representing the Social and Labor Convergence Program. So when Colleen was actually involved, it was a project, but now it's a program. We have a very similar history to APSCA. 2015, we convened, and we really started our operations then ramping up 2016, 17, and so a very young history as well. And we actually based our standards for qualifications for what we call our verifiers and verifier bodies, so auditors and audit firms, on APSCA. And now we have almost 1,000 approved verifiers, 71 active verifier bodies. To date, our goal is 9,000 verifications this year. And almost 80% of those verifications are done by APSCA members. So APSCA has really been very important to us, and actually starting January 1st, we will require any new applicants to be full APSCA members, and we're going to transition to full APSCA membership for all our verifier bodies. So having said that, our mission really is to unite and support stakeholders by developing and deploying a converged assessment framework that delivers harmonized, accessible, and trusted data. And so trust is where you guys come in as auditors to ensure that our data is credible and actionable. And we definitely have a lot planned for the next year with regards to training, but one specific thing that's already out there that we have in place now is our human rights due diligence toolkit that we developed mainly actually to educate our users of our data, so brands, on how SLCP can inform their due diligence activities. So as was already mentioned, audits are only one piece of the solution. Definitely not the solution for human rights due diligence. And so SLCP offers monitoring of data and tracking your performance. And data really is key. What data do you get out of SLCP? And our human rights due diligence toolkit is general information on 4 specific policies, OECD guidance on garment and footwear, the German Due Diligence Act, the EU legislation that's coming up, the CSDDD, and also the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. There will be more to come next year, but we definitely wanted to share this resource with you. That's free, so go to our QR code and check it out. There's information on those 4 pieces, as well as what's coming up and what you should be aware of as auditors related to human rights due diligence.
Excellent, thank you. And Ben?
Thanks. So at Impact, I know I've spoken to a lot of you yesterday already, but to give a very brief introduction, we conduct in-depth investigations and assessments, so very similar to social audit, but often for very targeted problems, such as the forced labor indicators. At Impact, we have a number of things online already, which can be really useful for training around forced labor, worker welfare. What I'll point you to in particular is in our report section of our website. If you follow the QR code up there, each year we've been publishing a annual report focused on the work of the Supreme Committee in Qatar in the FIFA World Cup. What this contains in it is our 70-page assessment as external monitor for the Supreme Committee and the work going on in Qatar. So all to do with construction companies, security companies, hospitality companies in the lead up to and delivery of the World Cup. We visited every 3 months, going back 7 years. We've spoken to about 3,000 workers per year and over 120 different companies there. This report includes recruitment fees data from all of these visits and compiled from every year. So this is some really useful benchmark data for for migrant origin countries going into Qatar specifically, but generally relates to the Gulf in general. So some really useful data on recruitment fees, first of all. Also some really useful data on worker satisfaction. We also have some useful analysis on the links between worker satisfaction and respect and remediation of recruitment fees as well. What we found is that when workers are being repaid recruitment fees but not told what it's for, they are 10% less satisfied and they feel 10% less respected than workers who are also being repaid recruitment fees but are told and explained what it's for and have been apologized to. And therefore feelings of productivity and sort of belonging within the company go up. What I'll also point you towards is the latest Qatar annual report. Section Appendix 4A contains best practice guidance on responsible recruitment to do with recruitment agencies. So there's a couple of pages of bullet points of what does good look like with recruitment agencies, due diligence requirements, service level agreements, grievance mechanisms for candidates during recruitment. That's a really useful resource to understand what good looks like, so that when you're doing your social audits, the management asks you, okay, so what do I do about it? How do I change these problems? You actually have some background knowledge of what good would look like and some of the good examples that we've seen. Then the other couple of things I want to briefly mention are our principles and guidelines. Firstly, on the repayment of recruitment fees, and secondly, on the non-payment of wages and the investigation and repayment of both of those things. So these principles and guidelines, each set took about 2 to 3 years to write and have peer reviewed by over 200 entities, private, public, NGO, all sorts of international organizations, have peer reviewed these in multiple rounds of review. So we're really confident that these represent the best practice approach to investigation of missing wages, investigation of recruitment fees, all the way through to calculating repayment, actually doing the repayment, communicating to workers to make sure that true remediation is happening, as well as verifying what's been done. So those are both available on our website, just free to use as good practice standards. They both have webinars attached to them as well, which go through and explain the contents of them in an hour or so. And they have short guides as well, so kind of cheat sheets of what they both contain. So that's a whistle-stop tour of what we've got available.
Excellent, excellent. So let's go back to Susanne, if we can, now. Tell us a little bit more about what's coming down the pipe. What else is coming down the road from SLCP that the auditors should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, so we will definitely be updating the human rights due diligence toolkit that we have. There are many more pieces of legislation that are coming that we want to dive into, but also the current frameworks are going to be updated. There's going to be more details, so definitely stay tuned for more iterations of the toolkit. Also, other things that we have are our collaboration with ILO Better Work specifically. So ILO Better Work does provide us with law overlays for Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And that means that depending on the SLCP data point, the question that is asked, again, we're trying to create harmonized data and converged data. So depending on the SLCP data point, the question that is asked, you would then see, if you are looking at the Bangladesh law overlay, what national labor law is applicable to Bangladesh, and also international labor standards as well. If there is no law that is applicable to that specific question, but there is an ILS, International Labor Standard, that is applicable, you will see that as well. So we're currently updating that with the help of Better Work, and that's really great information there for you. We also want to expand on that as well to other countries. So that's one resource for you as auditors. Also, we are exploring further with ILO what strategies could be feasible to strengthen the capacity of the SLCP verifiers to measure compliance with international labor standards and national labor law, all to support the collection of credible and actionable data. So definitely are doing that also with ILO. One thing that we did this year with WIRE is actually develop a training, holistic triangulation training, and that is up and running now for SLCP, but we just discussed that it might be something that we can also make available to other auditors as well, because it does have general principles that apply to any audit, not only SLCP as a scheme, but could be applicable to any scheme where you can learn as an auditor about holistic triangulation and what that means. And so anybody in SLCP who is taking the training, it will count towards CPD, but also we're going to work towards making it count for those who are not SLCP. This pilot, we called it a pilot because we wanted to see if training like this is feasible, if we can take it on, if we want to continue with this. This pilot brought the idea that actually we should as an industry collaborate together, also with audit firms, but also with other schemes to ensure that there is perhaps a Part 1 training that is generic to everybody, that is really needed for auditors, and a Part 2 then that can be scheme specific. So for example, with holistic triangulation, what we could have done is created a generic training scope that everybody could attend, that would be perhaps listed on the APSCA website, go towards CPD, and then a Part 2 would have been specific to our SLCP verifiers. How does this holistic triangulation apply to SLCP specifically? What does this mean when you engage with our tool? And this is something that I wanted to bring up here in this forum that is really focused on collaboration, that we could all do this together and perhaps through APSCA convene on this to create more training that can be used across the board, but then perhaps Amfori, RAP, SEDEX, SAI have their own training then that's very specific, and that would be the second step. But Ranjan mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of training out there and it's too much, so maybe this is one of the possible solutions.
Excellent. It's a great idea. Emily, when we were chatting a few weeks ago, I know you were also sharing that there's some new things being developed, some collaborative trainings coming out in the future. Can you tell us a bit more about that, tell the audience about that, and how you were focusing on developing countries, and share some of the rationale that you have for the development of those trainings and how auditor input was involved.
Sure, thanks. Well, in the realm of training, we have two types of training. The one is just a general training. It's on human rights due diligence, and auditors who are interested in understanding how their role as auditors fits within the entire due diligence process, all the steps, and what are the thought processes of companies and what they face more generally in their undertaking due diligence, might find that a useful course. It usually involves companies, but also initiatives. For instance, someone just mentioned BS, what I use, I'm showing my age, BSCI M40. M40 has participated, and various companies have participated, but also government officials who are trying to understand due diligence. So it's a very interesting course because it brings together a lot of different people from a lot of different entry points and a lot of different perspectives. Who also do a lot of peer-to-peer exchange and learning. So if you're looking for zooming out in your training, maybe to understand less about fine-tuning your work, but understanding how it fits in with the bigger picture, that course might be interesting for you. But I'm actually based not in Italy, but in Geneva, Switzerland, but our training center is in Turin, Italy. So that might be interesting for you. But the other project that's a joint project with ICS, which is a French government-funded initiative that you might be familiar with, that the whole goal of that, again, is to actually strengthen social auditing by helping you understand what your position is in the entire process and why your role is so important, but also deepen your knowledge of international labor standards, but also share good practices. ILO is responsible for the first two parts on strengthening your knowledge on international labor standards, but also your role in human rights due diligence. The International Training Center, which is a UN specialized agency as well, it is responsible for the third part on good practices in social auditing. As the previous speaker mentioned, we also have the ILO Better Work that's specific to textiles, or ready-made garments more specifically. But for those of you working on ready-made garments, the Better Work program has a wide range of tools and resources that you could tap into. And I think they're actually going to start branching out in training auditors outside of their own factory inspections. But I believe you have Better Work speaking on a separate panel, so I'll let them speak for themselves. But the whole rationale was to support social auditors because, as I mentioned before, your role is so important, and it's becoming more important as due diligence is becoming mandatory in many jurisdictions and liability is being introduced. So we want to support you because we worry that you're under a lot of pressure, but also you're becoming the linchpin in due diligence. No pressure again, but you're extremely important. So we really, really want to support you however we can.
Excellent. Sanjiv, let's come back to you. Advice. Any advice that you have for our CSCAs on how to stay on top of emerging issues? As you say, everything's always evolving, and as we get smarter, so do they.
Yeah, absolutely. It's changed a lot in the last 25 years that I've been in the business. Back then, you did not have 500 questions to answer in an audit report, and auditors are spending a lot more time filling up these reports, working in the nights, late in the nights. So it's really key that they utilize their time, the 8 hours of a typical audit day in the factory well. This came up in an earlier panel discussion that preparation is really, really important. And I think auditors need to understand that there's a certain amount of preparation that they would need to do beforehand. Being aware of the issues in the region, in the country that you are doing this audit or verification in is really super important because you'll ask the right questions, not just to workers, but also to management. That cuts down the time for that you spend on trying to understand what's happening or knowing their recruitment practices, because you already, for example, recruitment practices, that's one example. But there's a lot of other things that could be happening where you actually cut down on time. So I think for the CSCAs, I think they would certainly need to spend time understanding and preparing for this. Besides that, I think there's a lot of There are a lot of resources there to just perform better, understand the human side of auditing. I mean, this also came up in a panel discussion in the morning. That there's this, we have to humanize the approach. We can't be, using the checkbox approach to doing auditing. Yes, checklists are important, but they're just important as a reference point, but not to really ask questions. And I think that's something they need to do. They also need to start looking at how to build on conversations with management, build on conversations with workers, and ask very pertinent questions, because you only have those 8 hours, in a one-day audit. The other thing that I think auditors can also learn a lot about is body language, understanding what's happening in a typical audit, and when they speak to workers, it's in body language. It's not just about the eyes or the way they sit. It's a lot more than that. I think there's a lot of information out there where auditors can actually use to do their jobs better and be effective. So those are the changing things. I remember back in everything has got computerized now. Everything is so tightly managed by factories, and auditors are very, very sharp now at picking up things where documents and records could be fudged. And I remember seeing this in China many years ago. And the auditor actually went and asked a worker in the middle of the audit to go and tap on the screen that records the time and see what happens at the back end in the office. And that was very clever, because they had set it up to show 8 or 10 hours of work, but the moment the auditor tapped it, and it just threw the system out of sync, because nobody expected the worker to come in. And so they've got these techniques to do this, and I think they're getting sharper, they're getting better at it, but you still need to be on top of it as you move along in your auditing careers. And coming back to the discussion with Greg and Rajan in the morning, I think auditors have a really big role to play if they only did and use those tools that are already available for them in terms of improving the quality of audits.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example. Ben, I'm going to pose 2 questions to you, and you can decide how you want to handle it, which one or both. But we were chatting about, understanding what good looks like and really considering how remediation may happen. Those are also things that can help our auditors investigate and diagnose the issues thoroughly, right? So there's that, so you can expand on that if you'd like, or also appreciation for it happens everywhere, and if you want to expand on that.
Sure. So I'll speak about it happening everywhere. I touched on this a bit yesterday in the training session. So, when we're talking about forced labor, especially, commonly people have ideas in their mind of which, countries are the ones most at risk. But really, this is happening all around the world, all of the time, in just various different ways. As I was saying yesterday, in the UK, in my home county in Kent, there's agricultural workers on the seasonal agricultural worker scheme from Eastern Europe who are victims of 9, 10, 11 indicators of forced labor. There are kind of different sorts of operational procedures that allow this to happen. And even though this is not in line with international norms or good practices, it is legal for the charging of some related costs to do with recruitment. That's just one example. So just be aware that this could be happening in any context you go to, not just in the so-called high-risk countries. Then to go into the second point about what does good look like, and how can this help with investigation if we learn what appropriate remediation is. So the principles and guidelines which I spoke about earlier focus on 2 fairly specific issues within the realm of forced labor, so wage theft and recruitment fees or debt bondage. These principles and guidelines were both born out of a lot of field experience. So we started drafting these based on lots and lots of site visits, tens of thousands of worker interviews, hundreds of management interviews, and just finding again and again similar problems, similar gaps that weren't being fixed. These very much weren't about write a policy on this to sort of tick a box. It's very much about, well, what does the policy actually need to inform, what detailed procedures need to be in place, and then what due diligence do they need to be doing all the way down the line, as well as bringing in good practices that we'd seen from around the world. An example I used in the training yesterday was around human resource managers in Qatar who would travel to India to the recruitment drive to actually speak with candidates, give them pamphlets about what the exact worker journey would look like during recruitment, tell them all the points at which money may be asked for, and to keep receipts for those things because they'd be reimbursed, and gave them a phone number, had them ring it, and the phone rang, and it was his own number. And this successfully managed to get the next batch. It was only a small batch, but it's a good case study nonetheless. This got the next batch down to genuinely zero recruitment fees for that next drive because of these changes that were made. Understanding these kinds of things and adding them into these sets of principles and guidelines can really helped to bring these alive in a real life setting, and they've been tried and tested. Understanding what these good practices look like when we're on our investigations means that when we get one of those situations that I'm sure we've all had, I've had it plenty of times, you find a problem and management says, so what do I do? We're not completely sure. The more we understand what good looks like, because we've seen good practices elsewhere and we've seen complete gaps in management systems in other places, we can start to fill those gaps and start to understand what kind of things we can suggest, but also it helps us to spot those gaps again next time around. So really understanding those best practice cases can help us see in other situations what might be missing.
Excellent, excellent. Emily, I want to circle back to you and dig in a little bit on something that you commented on, but I also want to just keep watch of our time so that we do allow some time for some Q&As. So Emily, this is something that we focused on last year's meeting, and then is also going to be on a session tomorrow, is that, as you mentioned, right, the growing legislative focus of supply chain due diligence and the growing responsibility and liability. So in our conversation that we had a few weeks ago, we were talking about the differences in and the different roles that are involved in supply chain due diligence efforts. There's the auditor, certainly, there's the firm, of course, and then there's also the buyer and the brand, and then, of course, the factory. So if you want to share any of your thoughts on where that liability all sits and how that looks differently for different roles.
According to the German law, it ultimately rests not with the company, but with the CEO, that is, whose company is subject to the legislation, falls within the scope of the legislation. And it's the due diligence directive has not been adopted yet at the European level, and there's a lot of negotiation that's going on between the various bodies that finalize a directive. But it will probably be somewhat similar, at least, to the German law. And while we understand the motivation of liability, I think because it certainly makes people pay attention like nothing else, and a lot of your phones have probably been ringing off the hook because now they really need to be able to document and prove the basis for the decisions they've made, and the information that you obtain for them through audits is a critical part of that. But that also means that the liability that they face, the temptation may be, and because buyers are often very similar, they're all humans, and just as you see in factories, through audit processes, a lot of suppliers rising to the occasion and trying to do much better. There are others that are, even with the more sophisticated auditing practices, still channeling their energy into avoiding compliance, but trying to fool you in the process. And my big fear, or it's not just my fear, although there's no official opinion, but a lot of my colleagues that work in this field, we are terribly worried about the temptation to push liability down on the critical actors on whom they've depended for part of their due diligence information. And that would fall on the shoulders, at least to some extent, if not a significant extent, on auditors. And you could envision a scenario where auditors start to be sued because, for instance, Rana Plaza, it's no secret, many auditing firms or initiatives were in Rana Plaza just weeks and months before the building collapsed. And part of that was because building safety itself wasn't really on the checklist at that time. Now it definitely is on the checklist. But you can imagine there will be other things that are not necessarily foreseeable at the moment that could end up, being big failures, as dramatic failures, the way Rana Plaza was a dramatic failure. So you can imagine the possibility of auditors themselves or auditing firms or certification bodies certifying the work of auditors actually coming under scrutiny for potential counterclaims or cross claims where a CEO is found liable and turns around and sues the auditing firm that they relied on. I hope it's not the case, and I hope there aren't many CEOs who are facing liability because of really fraudulent practices and making false claims about their due diligence. Hopefully that will be the main focus of any liability claims of the state against CEOs in Germany or perhaps in the EU as a whole. But I am concerned. Again, that's part of our motivation for supporting suppliers, or not suppliers, social auditors. We also have a whole program on supporting suppliers as well. But the concern is to empower every actor in the chain through a shared understanding of knowledge and confidence to be able to speak up, especially when you're being asked to audit against things that don't really make sense. To give you an example, if, say, a company, and I don't know if you see it in your auditing practices, but I see it sometimes in codes, the temptation to set the minimum age at 16 or 18. The problem with that is you're actually violating the rights of young workers who have the right to work if the national law is at 15, and even if the national law is at 14. So, it's that's the sort of thing that, that there's a lot of nuances involved, I think, in social auditing that aren't appreciated by a lot of outside users, including even your direct customers, but also individuals and organizations that tend to critique social auditing as just as bad as public labor inspection because of all the same problems. And there's a lot of corruption in social auditing as well. It's not really professional. It's not really serious. A lot of the critiques, I was listening in the last session, and a lot of those common misconceptions came up. And so we're just trying in our way to support you, especially as you may start to feel more and more pressure with the changing landscape of human rights due diligence in general.
Right. All the reason for why APSCA exists and the mission and the vision that we have and why we're here is that growing liability. And, I say to all the auditors that are listening in or here today, that liability is real, but if anything, this is empowering you to really do your job. And that's what we need, is auditors to feel confident and empowered to do their job and do their job well. And that's where the liability will be less of an issue for them. Okay, so we have a bunch of Q&A happening here online. Thank you, everybody. Let's see, let's go with, and anyone on the panel, feel free for this one. The question says, schemes offer or require training beyond their scheme, should APSCA be the leader in making core training to reduce duplication of efforts? Do you feel that that's an APSCA role, or is that better suited for the organizations that we feel are better suited, like yourselves? I'm curious on what your points of view on that are.
I don't think that's APSCA's role. I mean, your mission and vision is very different. I think there are APSCA understands the problems, but it's not for them to. It's not their mission to develop training. So there are training firms. I mean, it's not just us, but there are other training firms that do this, specialize in this. And I think beyond the scheme training or the code training or the standard training, there's a lot of other training that is available, and people should look out for that training. There's ILO, which is there. Yeah.
Anne?
Yeah, if I can add, I don't think it's APSCA's role to create training, be a training provider, but I do think with the information that you have, what are the struggles of those auditors taking the exam, for example? Where do they make the most mistakes? What complaints do you hear about from the audit firms? What ethical issues are there going on in APSCA, et cetera? You have that information, so I think the role that you can play is to unite everybody. What are some of the most important things that are required for training? Again, as has been mentioned, it's a baseline. Passing the exam is just a baseline. CPD is really, really important. And so what CPD is necessary right now for everyone across the board, can we all collaborate on that? And can we then work with training providers to then provide that training for everybody? And is that then something that has to be brought into the schemes to then say, okay, now this specific problem of or issue of forced labor, how does it translate now to SLCP? How will you deal with the SLCP tool to extract this information? But general training is definitely something that can be across the board for every scheme. So I really, really want to emphasize that collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Ben?
Yeah, and just to pick up on what Susanne's just said, this was exactly what we tried to do with the training yesterday, right? We had an exchange of emails about where common exam struggles were, and then had the training try and address some of these issues. So like exam 2 and exam 3 and digging deeper. That was a very common theme yesterday. So yeah, really agree with that point. I think I would also agree that this is not APSCA's role, and having other organizations do it can help stretch thinking, give a different perspective, and the risk that if APSCA did it, would there be an issue of marking one's own homework to some extent? So I think always good to get other opinions and observations. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So this question is about generally speaking, I'm not going to get as specific as the question asks, actually, but what are your organizations doing to try and ensure that we are a global association of auditors of all over the world, and what are some of the things that your organizations are doing to make it easier for auditors, no matter where they are located, to be able to participate? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So we've had the courses that were APSCA recognized for the last 2 years. We are now changing them to be shorter courses. We're breaking down the modules, the 8-hour course into different modules, which are 2 hours each. And we are also putting them online. They are going to be online, and people can then, these are self-paced courses with quizzes and short exams in between. So you can, you can keep measuring as you kind of go along. So that's something we're doing, and we are also looking at getting them translated into other languages, Chinese for one, Spanish going forward. So yes, so those are courses that are going to be all broken down into shorter pieces so that people can take it more conveniently rather than spend a whole day, which I know auditors, the firms don't like the auditors going away for a whole day of training, and it's really important that they can do this over a period of time, over the weekend, or whenever they have time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're doing the exact same things, really, translating into different languages, doing brief summaries of them instead. We're also looking, we've just created the short versions of the principles and guidelines in listenable format as well. So if you're on the go or traveling, then you can get key bits on your way to the audit, or there's a lot of travel time where you might not be able to have a laptop open, for example. We're trying more and more as well to run to run more consistent webinars for people to attend and have Q&A. We try and run these at multiple times as well. So the same webinar for different time zone friendly time slots as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. Emily, anything to add?
I believe you actually work with ICS, because ICS was in our training last week, and they had mentioned that you collaborate with them or have some sort of relationship with them. So that the training package will be available, I think, to anyone, including the people in your audience who hopefully would be interested in taking it. But I just wanted to mention, for your other question, I think what would be really useful, just from my experience talking with a select group of auditors, that you could act as a sort of clearinghouse for the different kinds of training that's available, and people could ask, in the AI bot that you produce, I'm looking for training on X, and you can give them a comparative analysis of the different types and what they might be relevant for. That would be probably a very useful function, because there seems to be a lot of skills development programs out there for auditors, but maybe the landscape is kind of crowded, and to be able to sort through them in a systematic way could be a service that you guys provide as APSCA. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So we do have on our website, on the APSCA website, there is a place where auditors can look to see some options and different offerings from our partners, such as the folks on our panel here today. But to your point, it's not all inclusive. And so we need to hear from our auditors, what more are they missing, what more are they needing, what more are they feeling that we could collaborate on and give you more feedback on topics. And that does come back from our exam feedback as well, right? So we do keep a track. That is one of the questions here in the Slidos here, is that we are looking at the exam and where the failures are and why, and feeding that to organizations like yours to help bridge that gap in knowledge. So thank you very much for doing that. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to let you all have sort of 1 minute of closing remarks. There are other questions in the Slido that we will just respond back to you online. I don't think it necessarily needs to take up more time here, so I'm going to give you each another minute in our last few minutes here.
Yeah, okay. Coming back to the discussion and the panel discussion, the first one this morning is the shortage of auditors, and that's, I think, just temporary. It's over a period of time that from 2,500 it'll be 5,500. So I think CSCS really need to concentrate on getting better, because once you have a larger pool of auditors, then the member firms would be able to pick and choose whom they want to work with. So we need to really think about a couple of other things. That was another part of another discussion which I heard the panel before this, was communication during the audit. How to communicate, what to communicate. It's not really about what you say, but how you say it and put it across. That's one thing that auditors need to really look at doing correctly. Also, I think auditors would need to really up their skills with understanding national laws, changes to laws, the intricacies of laws, and the implications of not following the laws. From that point, I think it's quite clear that the way forward, you will have more auditors, and CPD is going to be a mandatory requirement. Even if it's not a mandatory requirement, there are people who come to our training, wire training, where they don't want the CPD for what it is, but they want it for sharing their experience with other people in the courses. The last course that we had 2 weeks ago, we had 14 auditors from 9 countries. So that just shows that it's picking up speed, and people are there to actually learn from the others, and that's really important. So my suggestion is that keep abreast of the developments of what's available in terms of training, and keep auditing. Yeah.
So I just want to shout out again that I would like to see more collaboration. The baseline is passing the Part 3 exam, but CPD is important, and CPD should be accessible, should be streamlined, should be relevant to everybody, and you don't want duplication. So we really need to get together on this as an industry to ensure that we can help auditors to become better and really focus their training time.
Just for my echo what everyone else has said, but just to add, my kind of experience and my advice is very much just never stop learning whilst you're on the job. So some of the most important things you can learn, as I'm sure we've all experienced, is from workers, from management. You see good practices, remember them, write them down, discuss them at events like these, and share that knowledge as you go. This will just help enhance your future audits if you can come along with tried and tested things that others have done that you think could work elsewhere. It'll also help you to spot gaps. So yeah, just never stop learning.
Excellent. Emily?
I would just like to wish you all luck and again reiterate how important your work is, and going forward, not just for companies undertaking due diligence, but also ultimately for the workers who benefit from the high quality of your work and your deep commitment. And like I said, the help desk is there to help you if you have a question. And when that online training comes out with ICS, I'll definitely let you guys know if ICS doesn't already do that. Hopefully you can tap into that as well. We're here to support you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.